Shalom, shalom. This is Elder Isaac Hill, Restorers of Truth Ministry, sharing with you another Scripture Nugget. And today's Scripture Nugget will be found in Mark chapter 9 and also Numbers chapter 11. But let's begin in Numbers, or rather Mark chapter 9 first, and then we'll go to the book of Bemidbar, or the book of Numbers chapter 11. Mark chapter 9. Beginning at verse 36, we find Messiah Yahushua, and he took a little child and set him in their midst, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one of such little children in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but the one who sent me. Now he's talking to his Talmudim. Now notice the reply or the response of Yochanan in verse 38 of John. He says, and Yochanan said to him, Teacher, we saw someone who does not follow us, casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him because he does not follow us. Let's stop right there. That something occurred here in which it made John or Yochanan want to make this statement. And what was happening here is that the master, the teacher, Yahushua, is showing them a principle here on how to deal with people or how to receive indifferent people. So he says, let's back up a little bit. And he set a child in front of them. And anytime Yahushua does this, he's trying to teach a principle through a demonstration. And so what John did, he replied, we saw someone that did not follow us and we forbade him. Now, if I could put a little scripture title nugget on this, I would say follow the pattern, or better yet, it would be described as deviation from the pattern. Deviation from the pattern. And what happens is that sometimes when people come out of Christendom to embrace Torah or some other faith, when they decide to embrace Torah, what they do, they find three things that they're faced with. Number one, that is a variation of how Torah is presented. Number two, there is a culture in which Torah is presented. And number three, they find a custom, how Torah is walked out, or holiday. And so what happens is sometimes these people that comes out of Christendom or that comes from another faith, they don't quite understand or know which assembly, which congregation, or which connectivity, or which fellowship I should connect with, or unite with, or just to be a part of. And so mainly it's because of those three things. It's because of variation of Torah, or it's because of the culture, or because of the custom. And so this becomes a little hindrance. But I believe Yahushua in this particular text is giving us a perfect example as he gave his Talmudim. Look what he says in verse 4, or verse 39. Remember in verse 38, Yochanan said they forbade this occurrence because they were casting out demons, because they didn't follow them. They didn't follow their pattern. And speaking of pattern, I don't think Yochanan did this out of hatred. I think he did this because he didn't quite grasp or understand. You see, what happens is that sometimes, because we know that Yah works in a certain pattern, he rarely deviates from the pattern. But when he deviates, we still have to recognize this is Yah's doing. Because he created the pattern, he can deviate from the pattern. Okay? So, right here, Yahushua says in verse 39, Do not forbid him, for no one who works a miracle in my name is able to readily speak evil of me. For he who is not against us is for us. Now, this is a perfect example, a perfect, if you will, pattern deviation. Because here Yochanan experiences people who are doing what they are doing, but they're not following them or the Talmudim or Yahushua as their Talmudim is following Yahushua. So what happens is Yochanan forbids them. So when he forbids them, Yahushua says, you shouldn't have done that, paraphrase, because they cannot do the things and speak evil of me. They cannot do the things that you do or that we do. They cannot walk in Torah and do the things you do and then end up speaking against me because I am the Torah. I am the living Torah. I'm showing you how to walk into it. So, uh, so it wasn't necessarily that Yochanan was being evil. It was the fact that there was a variation. There was a different practice, if you will, but yet it's Torah. Now, we're not talking about someone that is walking in anti-Torah. We're talking about someone who uh, practices and do things perhaps a little different because of the variation, because of the culture, and because of the custom. Okay, so let's look at the Bemidbar or Numbers chapter 11. We'll find a similar situation. Now here, Yah has called Moshe and told Moshe to bring the 70 elders uh, to the tent of appointment. Now, when they get there, we find, let's pick it up in verse 24. And Moshe went out and spoke to the people the word. This is Bemidbar chapter 11, Numbers chapter 11. And he gathered the 70 men of the elders of the people and placed them around the tent. And Yah came down in the cloud and spoke to him and took of the spirit that was upon him, Moshe, and placed the same upon the 70 elders. And it came to be when the spirit rested upon them that they prophesied but did not continue. However, 2 men had remained in the camp. The name of one was Eldad, and the name of the other Medad, and the Spirit rested upon them. And they were among those listed, but they did not go out to the tent. Paraphrasing, instead, what they did, they prophesied in the camp. Now, this kind of made people, uh, they offended some people. And so what happened? A young man ran, it says in verse 27, and informed Moshe. Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. And Yahushua, son of Nun, Joshua, Moshe's assistant from his youth, answered and said, Moshe, my master, forbid him. But notice the response of the Torah giver, Moshe. Moshe returned to, in verse 29, then Moshe said to him, are you jealous for my sake? Oh, that all the people of Yah were prophets, that Yah would put his spirit upon them. Now, what is happening here? There is a pattern deviation. Sometimes that pattern deviation occurs when we sometimes feel as if this is the way Yah is doing or doing something. This is the direction he's going. This is a pattern that he plainly sets. This is a directive that he has given. But I want you to understand that sometimes the person that created the pattern is the person that can deviate from the pattern. So if Yah, knowing that he works in cycles and patterns, and I mean, after all, he gave us a weekly Shabbat. He gave us feast. He gave us patterns. He gave us Torah. There's a pattern in Torah. However, when Yah gets involved, when it is a Yah doing, if I could say that, then that's when we as men and as vessels and instruments, we should pull back and say, allow Yah to do his thing, if I could say that word or that phrase. Allow him to do the thing that he wants to do. Because what's more important is that his will be done. Okay, sometimes we can get, as leaders, we can get kind of caught up into variations, and not just leaders, but just believers in general. Sometimes we get caught up into, there is such a pattern of Yah that when there is a variation, or when there is a culture, or when there is a custom change, then all of a sudden we become offended. And when we become offended, we tend to leave Torah, or we become to, not necessarily leave Torah, but become very offended to the point where we're criticizing some things. We call people anti-Torah. We're not talking about anti-Torah. What we're talking about is a variation, a custom, and a culture. That's what we're talking about. When there is a difference in that, sometimes there becomes a problem. Okay? And then when people stress the variation or stress the culture and stress the custom above Torah, then what we're doing, we're actually replacing Torah with our variation, with our culture, and with our custom, which is very dangerous, which is very dangerous. So what is Yah teaching us today in this Scripture Nugget? He's telling us that he can change the pattern. He can change the pattern. And we should recognize when the pattern changes, recognize whether it be of Yah or not. If Yah ends up being glorified, then it's of Yah. Okay? So it's not necessarily the variation, it's not necessarily the culture, it's not necessarily the custom, but it's all about following his pattern and learning to deviate from the pattern when Yah is doing. Shalom, shalom. See you next time on Scripture Nugget.